Adam Archuleta is a former first-round draft pick, All-American in college, and he had one of the best pro day performances ever by a defensive back. Now, in this episode, Adam and I dive into the keys to his success in college, in the NFL, and how he was able to train for his pro day. We talk about the methodologies from his strength and conditioning coach, Jay Schrader, as to how all the eccentric, concentric, isometric, and all the plyometric, fancy training and the modalities that were done with Jay and how it was revolutionary at the time. Before we dive into this episode, please hit that like and subscribe button. 2026 ends the 3-year current CEU cycle for the NSCA. Do not wait until December 31st, 2026 to get your CEUs submitted to the NSCA. Get it taken care of now with an annual membership to Strength Coach Network, where you will get access to Performance Coaching 101, 102, 103, with each course giving you access to 2.0 NSCA CEUs. If you also need CSCCA CEUs, those same courses come with 10 CEUs to the CSCCA. If you need CEUs to the NSCA, CSCCA, you need help getting reinstated by going through all the process for the CSCCA from last year, or you want to just make sure you knock out everything for the NSCA with this year, 2026, being a reporting period, please reach out to us at service@strengthcoachnetwork.com. We will get you taken care of. We'll help you get everything lined up so you can keep your certification and you don't have to worry about anything other than coaching your athletes. Again, you can click the link down below for more information or email us at service@strengthcoachnetwork.com. TeamBuildr is Strength Coach Network's trusted provider for online software for strength coaches. It does not matter what sector of strength and conditioning you work in, you want to get TeamBuildr because you will be able to program for your athletes, simply distribute the training to them, and make changes, modifications, whatever you need. I've been utilizing them since 2019 when I was back at Towson. I still use it in person at Goldfinch with all my remote clients throughout the country, and in person at the high school, Centennial High, right down the road when I was volunteering for them. You got to check out TeamBuildr in the link down below. The people that work for them are former strength and conditioning coaches, so they get it. They are able to help you with all of your needs. Again, reach out to your TeamBuildr rep and learn more about them in the link down below.
And you don't, I'm an open book, so.
The fact you said it's been 30 years.
Yeah, well, yeah. So I graduated high school in 1996. And I met Jay my junior year, so 1995. So, yeah, we're 30 years into this, which is pretty amazing to me. It's pretty amazing, and haven't really thought much about it. You know, I know that, you know, a lot of older people now, I guess, kind of heard about my story, and my name is kind of tied to training and workout. But I guess I never really realized it until I started sharing stuff, and there seems to still be a lot of interest in the way I did things. So here we are.
I mean, it was revolutionary. How'd you meet Jay?
Yeah, it was interesting. So, you know, I knew from a young age that I was going to play in the NFL. I wasn't big enough or fast enough or strong enough like most kids. But I always had a curiosity, and I was always a reader. I was always a learner. I was reading diet books. You know, I think I read Udo Erasmus's Fat Book in the 90s. You know, I mean, I was reading as much as I could, trying to figure out, you know, how do I do it? And, you know, at that time, there really wasn't the internet. So you just had to get your hands on whatever, whether it was Muscle Media or Flex Metal, whatever it was, right? And so I remember I was visiting my dad in Wyoming for Christmas, and I was reading one of the muscle mags, and there was an advertisement for a really obscure powerlifting magazine in the back of it called Powerlifting USA. And I asked my dad, I said, "Hey, can I get this for Christmas?" It was like a $50 subscription or whatever. And the very first issue that I got was in January, and Jay had written an article in it. And I don't know, there was just something about it. I felt in my mind, this guy knows something about training. So I just called him. And, you know, just out of the blue. And I said, "Hey, you know, I read your article, really interested in it." And he's like, "Well, you don't sound very old, right?" And I said, "No, I'm 17. And he said, "Well, this is for advanced powerlifters. You know, you have no business doing anything like this, you know, quite honestly." And he said, "You know, here's a number, call this guy in Minnesota, tell him you want a football program. He said, I'm in Mesa, Arizona. And I said, wow, I'm in Chandler, Arizona. Where are you? And we just happened to be about 15 minutes away from each other. So that's really how it kind of started. It was just me on a quest for information, and it just struck me like, I've got to meet this guy. And, quite honestly, it's kind of been the story of my life.
So is that why you chose Arizona State, because you're in that state, you were local to the area?
No, I chose Arizona State because I didn't have any options. So I didn't have any scholarship offers. So my option was junior college. And because at that time, I didn't have the projected measurables of what a scholarship athlete would look like. So really the only option I had, not even small schools, was just junior college. I was a good football player. I was All-State Defensive Player of the Year, all that stuff. But again, it's just as a defensive back, those numbers, those measurables didn't really translate, right? And then spring of my senior year, I got a call from the graduate assistant at Arizona State. And he said, hey, we've seen some of your stuff. Our linebacker coach would like to talk to you. And I was like, you guys know I'm 190 pounds, right? And they're like, yeah, we know. And I really hadn't heard of him yet. But obviously Pat Tillman was there. So he was an undersized guy, really, really one of the first. And so I went to meet them during their spring practice, sat in there with the linebacker coach and the defensive coordinator. They actually put tape of Pat Tillman on, and they said, what do you think? You think you could do that? And I said, yeah, absolutely. And so really I credit, I was going to do it anyways, but I've been such a believer in my life. And now that I've experienced, 30 years later, that the power of the mind is really what the key is. And so the fact that I was able to visualize somebody smaller who was successful, I think it just opened up a subconscious path in my mind that allowed me to say, you know what? Yeah, anything is possible. And so when I went home after that meeting, what's interesting too is even when I went to meet Jay for the first time, and even when I went to meet the ASU coaches, my mom didn't go with me. Now, my mom was tremendously supportive. I mean, my mom is everything. But I just went myself. So, I didn't have parents holding my hand or doing that. I was just motivated. And it's like, whatever I need to do, I'm going to do. And so I think that's part of the story as well. But when I talked to my mom and she said, well, what do you think? I said, quite honestly, I want to go to the NFL. And so if I go to junior college, I'm just going to be in the same place that I am in 2 years. And so I might as well go find out and compete. And so really that's the way I made my decision.
And so, go there and go and train there for all 4 years. And then that's how you went from, the walk-on to the first-round draft pick. Nick and I worked together for 3 years at Iowa, so I was familiar. I read that article that he wrote about you. How did that experience go for you in your perspective?
What exactly?
What took for you to be successful from walk-on to your senior year in the weight room, and how did you complement what that strength staff was doing with what you knew and learned from Jay because you met as a junior?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot. I've learned a lot of lessons. So, probably I don't really know where to start, to get it in a podcast like this, but I just knew instinctively in my mind that when I met Jay, that this is the way elite athletes train. And so I just knew it. And I knew instinctively that what everybody else is doing isn't right. And so in my mind, I had to do everything possible to continue to train with him. And so, it's kind of interesting. When I got to ASU, you're just a nobody, you're just a walk-on. And I did earn a scholarship after my first year, but my coaches and my strength coach, who kind of knew Jay, found out that I was training with him.
Gotcha.
And so that created a problem. And, it's kind of crazy, but I ended up telling my coaches. And I remember as a nobody walk-on freshman, my defensive coordinator, Phil Snow, who is tremendous. I have a great relationship with him, but he, obviously the coaches don't want you training and doing other things, right? I was still training with the team, but I was kind of supplementing and doing my own thing. And they told me not to do it. And I actually told him, I said, I told him no. I doubled down on myself and I said, I'm going to do everything the team does. And I need to continue to train. So it wasn't year round, depending on the time of year, but Jay's gym was about 15 minutes from ASU. And so I would supplement, and really the reason why is my body didn't feel the same training with the team. And so the idea of training the nervous system, being able to train with Jay kept me tuned up, kept me, performing at a high level. But it wasn't kind of the beat down traditional strength program that you're going to see from colleges and universities. So, on spring break, I would do double sessions with Jay, and in the summertime, when we had about 3 or 4 weeks, I would tell the team I was going to visit my dad, and I would just do double sessions with Jay.
Hawk & Dynamic is Strength Coach Network's trusted provider for force plates and for handheld dynamometers. Not only am I using it now in the private sector at Goldfinch, I was utilizing this software when I was back at Towson University. You're able to transport the plates because I've taken them from our private sector facility to our other locations, also been able to take it from our private in-person location to the high school down the road to do some testing with athletes right then and there. You're able to pair your true strength with the striking difference machine. The people at Hawken are fantastic. The technology is second to none. You have to learn more about Hawken Dynamic in the link down below.
So it was like every time I had a chance of just pure training, that's what I would do. And so I was dedicated to it. And that's kind of how I managed it for my career. Now I'll say once I got good, and the results were undeniable, my coaches kind of let me do whatever I wanted to, right? And so my junior and senior year, it was like, all right, we're not going to mess with Adam because, quite honestly, there's nobody faster or stronger than him, and he performed. So, and I was still a good teammate and a good leader and all that stuff. So that's kind of the long version, or the short version of kind of how it went. But that was kind of my experience.
But there's a lot of value in that for our listeners, because maybe you're talking to strength coaches right now that are in the private setting and they're trying to learn to work with high school or college strength coaches, or they're on the other end of it and they feel like they're fighting over that athlete and they don't know how to actually make it work. How can they make it work right now in today's 2026?
I don't know. I got to be honest. It's a tricky one. I really don't, because the only reason why, trust me, it would have been a lot easier for me just from an energy standpoint, a schedule standpoint, if I got what I needed from the ASU strength and conditioning, right? If I knew my needs were getting met, then that would have been easy and it wouldn't have been an issue. But quite honestly, they weren't. And I had the, luxury or the benefit of having something else that was working. So in my mind, I couldn't afford not to do what Jay was doing, because when I only exclusively trained with ASU, my body didn't feel the same. I was worn down. I was worn out. And anytime I started training with Jay again, I just felt like I was revved up and ready to go. Right. And so I just knew that this was the way, and I was going to do everything possible. And I think it's kind of funny is there's a lot of different things that happened. But there's a few things that caused me to kind of reevaluate, where I was in my position, on the football team after my sophomore year. But I actually moved back home after my sophomore year, back home with my mom, because I just felt like I needed to focus more, and I needed to train, and I needed to sleep, and I needed to eat. And that was just a better environment for me to accomplish what I needed to accomplish. So, there's a lot of different things that went into my journey and my story. But I just knew that, what I was creating, both physically, spiritually, emotionally, that all came from those lessons in that gym with Jay.
Talk to anybody right now listening to okay, what made it so special? Because our listeners, they're trying to recreate, or not recreate, but they're trying to capture that and have that relationship with the athletes that they work with. What made it so special from your perspective, so they can try to reverse engineer it and have the same success and have their athletes saying the same thing?
That's a great question. I think from the moment that I met Jay, he really challenged. I mean, look, I was only a 17-year-old kid, so I didn't know anything, right? So, but he challenged what I thought was the way to go and what was correct. And from the first day, he really kind of changed my thinking and how I should be thinking about training. Talking about what true power is, what true velocity is. Really introducing the concept of what the central nervous system does and why you should train. He really introduced me to a lot of concepts that, for me, kind of opened up a brand new world of how to look at things. So I think he changed my mentality. And I think the important part of my story was just, it's really a story about belief. I think it was his training and the things that he put me through, and he put me through hell mentally, emotionally, spiritually, like everything. I mean, this guy he tested me on a daily basis, but in my mind, I was constructing a machine and a warrior. And so everything that he threw at me, it was a mentality of, it was the growth mindset of growth mindsets. It was never, well, are you sure? Or I don't know about this. Can I do this? It was just cool. What else? And I think for him, he had a great benefit of having a student that was, I think Jay was experimenting in his process. And so he had somebody that was willing really to do anything without question, and then commit and give it all I had. And really, really, he taught me how to participate in every rep, emotionally, physically, everything that went into it. One thing I think is interesting that a lot of people don't know is that when I first met him the first night, he basically, he kind of just ridiculed me and demeaned me for 2 hours and told me that I didn't have what it took, and I was crap, and he trained sophomores in Texas that would crush me and all that stuff. And so I remember him telling me, well, you're not good enough to train in my gym, but I'll write you programs. And so you can do your programs. And I'll teach you how to do them, but you're going to be on your own. And so I was like, cool. So I remember going back, we didn't have cell phones. So I was gone for like 2.5 hours, and my mom said, hey, how did it go? And she said, you were there for a long time. And I said, well, he basically kind of cussed me out and told me I wasn't shit for 2 hours. And she goes, well, what do you think? I said, well, I think he's the guy. Right. And so I said, it's going to cost $50 a month. And I said, can we do that? And, we didn't come for much, but my mom said, if you think he's the guy, then we'll pay the $50 a month. But anyways, he made me do this program. A couple things jumped out at me when I first started doing this program. And so the first was, let's just say, for example, I think at that time, my bench max was right around 240 pounds or something like that. And after 2 weeks, the weights that I was using started to get easier, as they normally do when you lift weights, right? And so I remember calling him and I said, well, the weights are starting to get easy. Should I add weight? Because you think, hey, things are getting easy. Should I add weight? And he said, no, that's where people go wrong. He said, you want to learn how to move that weight faster and faster, and you want your body to adapt to moving that weight faster. A lot of times people move on too fast, but their body never learns how to move at speed and velocity, right? And so just that idea kind of changed everything that I thought about training, right? The idea of moving at speed and why it's so important. And really, the goal isn't to always just put on more. What you're trying to do is reset your new normal to move faster, right? In a layman's way.
No, but you're absolutely right. Everybody, hey, 250 is easy. Now I got to go 265, 275, 285 instead of, no, how fast is that 250?
Right. And so that really changed a lot in the way I looked at it. And so here's the second part. And so I called him after a month and I said, all right, I finished with the workout. And he said, all right, bring in your results and we'll see where you're at. So I came in, I was like, results. So I went in and he said, do you have your basically stopped the gym, and there was like 20 or 30 people in there, and basically berated me in front of everybody. Said, you don't have what it takes. You're not through the whole deal. And so the condition for him writing programs from that point forward for the next 6 months was that I had to keep a training log. And so I had to buy a blood pressure cuff. So I had to wake up in the morning, record my waking pulse, my waking blood pressure, my body weight. I had to record any dreams that I had. I had to record every gram of protein, carbs, and fat, when I ate it. But what he also made me do is I had to record with a stopwatch or have somebody time the concentric part of every rep of every set that I did.
Powerlift is Strength Coach Network's trusted provider for exercise equipment. Made here in the USA, right down the road in the state of Iowa, Powerlift has the ability to customize whatever you need in your room, regardless of the sector of strength conditioning. If you need a massive, big room, they have the ability to help you with that. If you're confined with space and you need to get creative, their reps are able to help you get what you need done and being able to get any customizations that you or your organization want with your logo on the equipment. Click the link down below to learn more about Powerlift, and if you have any questions about them, please feel free to reach out to us.
So, and I had to write this in a log, and I had to do the same thing, my body weight at night. It took me an hour to do this damn log. But what I've noticed is when I started to time, and it wasn't perfect, right? You're getting guys, but you kind of get a general sense. What I learned about my body and how to move my body, I was so in tune, and now I could start to understand the difference, let's just say for a bench press, for example, the difference between 1.2 seconds and like 0.89 seconds. I could feel those changes. But then I realized, well, if I want to move at velocity, well, then I have to eccentrically load properly. I can't use gravity. I can't use momentum. I have to be in the right position. Right. So I would be able to say, well, that was slower. Why? Well, my elbow moved out. Right. The hyper awareness I had about my body was on a different level because I had to do this for 6 months. I mean, so what I learned from that is that everything matters, right? You can't go on autopilot, and it's not just about getting through the exercise. It's about the intention of really feeling like what is happening in my body. And I think that experience, so that was, really the last half of my junior year, just that experience alone, I knew I was doing something at a different level than anybody else. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And I think because I was trained to train with that intentionality is one of the reasons why I got the extreme results that I did.
Your point right there makes me I've been doing more research on this velocity loss stuff, and there's research out there saying when you do hypertrophy, a lot of reps, there's going to be a drop off 30 to 40%. I've talked with strength coaches that work in high school and college, but what we found is that mindset stuff. I don't think a guy like you, even with 60 to 65% on the bar, and maybe you wouldn't do 20 reps because that's too much and you're tapping into the type 1 fibers, and you're not, it's getting less and more powerful because you're doing that many reps. I don't think that you're going to be at a 30% decrement from rep 1 to rep 20 because of how dialed in you are. Doesn't happen.
I'm not, I don't get into the scientific stuff, right? That's not my realm of researching and all that stuff. I'm a feel guy. And so I think the lessons that I learned in that gym, whether it's lifting weights or whether it's trying to get good at football or whatever it is, I need to feel it and I got to be able to visualize it. And so I think what happens when you really try to figure out what's happening, you really start to create this picture in your mind of who you are. You actually become the training, right? You're literally creating yourself. Oh, my camera zoomed in. What happened? Somebody got excited.
I have no idea.
Yours on your camera.
Zoom in.
I wonder what happened there.
You're on a tiny stream camera. I have no idea what happened.
Let me see if I can.
Oh, there you go.
I wonder why that happened. All right. So, as I was saying, I really think that everything was a feeling. And every exercise that we did, I'm trying to feel what it's supposed to feel like, right? And so I really do think that it was more than just training. It was really creating an identity of who you are. And I think, your self-image and the story and what you say to yourself and your self-talk have just as much to do with your success as the physical stuff, even more, in fact. And one thing that Jay was very adamant about in the things that he taught was how much you have to emotionally participate in what you're doing, and you can't go on autopilot, right? I learned that very early because I started to see the results. And I really, that's one of the lessons that I've carried with me my entire life.
And so what I'm saying, when I look back at I have my data right here. So I did a heavy back squat, and then I took it down 40%. So I was at 60% of that. So if you're getting, like you as a dialed in athlete, and you're getting your feedback on every single rep based off of your feel, I just don't see somebody like you letting the velocity drop that much, because you're going to brace, reset. You talked about your elbows being where they need to be. Like, you're just too dialed in. And that's why I think we're just scratching the surface on this velocity stuff.
Yeah, there's so many different types of methodics that Jay used. And, Jay is truly an artist. And one thing that people don't really understand is that maybe for the first 10 years, maybe I didn't do the same workout program more than 2 or 3 times.
Really?
So one of the great gifts that Jay really had was his ability to observe what's happening and how you're moving that day, and then be able to make the changes in the workout program right there and say, well, this is what's happening. We need to do this exercise, or we need to switch to this energy system, right? Or, boy, he can handle this. Let's push it, right? And so that, to me, we may go, there were times, and we did upper and lower body every day. And sometimes we'd go heavy, everything, for 2 weeks. And here's the other thing that I learned from Jay is that, I hear a lot of people say that, and certainly I agree with this, there's this notion of overtraining.
I'm glad you said this.
And so people would look at me, and there was a maybe a line of demarcation. I think the early years, maybe the first 4, maybe 5 years, Jay kind of shifted philosophies once I got into the NFL. And so it wasn't as much. Then he started getting into the ISOs and all that stuff. The early years was the stuff I really gravitated to, was really intense volume, high intensity, high load. I kind of craved that, quite honestly.
That was the kind of
max recoverable volume stuff.
Vitruve is the trusted VBT source for Strength Coach Network, and I have been utilizing this for years at Goldfinch, and I'm going to continue to utilize it because the great price for the encoder, as well as the accuracy with the data. Whether I'm measuring average, peak, or any other metric, if I want to include range of motion, fatigue loss during the set, intra-set, whatever it is, I can trust Vitruve. And they are continuing to push the needle and continuing to educate coaches on best practices within the VBT world. Not only do they live in that VBT world, but now they've come out with their new hub. And if you want to learn more about the hub and how it can help you with all of your athletes that you are working with, as we are starting to do this at Goldfinch for our middle school all the way up to college athletes, check them out in the link down below.
Like, how much work can you, Adam Archuleta, handle and still be able to recover and play from the next day? And nowadays the pendulum has kind of swung to, hey, don't do any over hard work, so that way they don't get overtrained. And I agree with you. I think that pendulum has swung way too far.
Yeah, well, I think, the traditional way that, and I don't know how people are training now. So I really can't say how, the good people in your industry, I'm not really sure, right? I'm just talking about, at least from then, and even through a lot of my playing career and when I was paying attention, I don't think that coaches really had the expertise that Jay did to give their athletes that much volume. I think Jay was special in that regard, at least with me anyways, because, here's another thing that I learned from him is that how you feel, I keep saying, I'm always trying to feel things, but how you feel is really irrelevant. So there may be times I go into the gym and I feel like I'm tired. But then he says, well, no, look at you're performing. Like you're still moving at velocity. So it doesn't matter how you feel, your body is still performing, right?
Yep.
And so then it was just like, all right, well, if I'm still performing in his mind, and he had the ability, we didn't time everything after that, but he had the ability to see, is he moving fast enough or not? Or if he's not, what do we need to recover? And he would use different exercise methodics to recover, right? So it was mainly, his thing was like, I want you to be able to, with minimal to no warm up, at any time, any place, turn it on and go, right? And so sometimes we would bench, squat, we'd go heavy all the time. And sometimes we would do, I don't know, 2 hours worth of heavy singles every 3 minutes, I mean, it was the things that he would make me do, but it was always like, all right, let's do it, right? So that was kind of the mentality. But then to me, that also reinforced this image, like there's nothing that anybody can do to me. I can handle anything, right? And I know that even though I might feel like crap, well, when I need to run, when I need to perform, when I need to do this, I can still do it. So how I feel is irrelevant. Fatigue in my mind, that's irrelevant, because you got to see how the body is working. So those are some of the very unique traits that Jay has that people really, unless you've experienced, don't really understand. And so he did a lot of things that people would say, you just can't do that. It's too much on the body.
Yeah, he was essentially rewriting the book.
I mean, I would say so. I mean, at that time, yes.
And he was doing like you would own that bottom position, an isometric, then the eccentric, then the concentric of a dynamic reversal. Like that was his kind of periodization model from what I've gathered.
In terms of
like bench press, you would own the bottom of a bench. Like you'd hold down here in the bottom, really, really, long and strong in the bottom. Then it would be, a 4 or 5 second lowering. Then it would be move it as fast as you can, the dynamic reversal. Because that's a flip on most coaches would be like, all right, Adam, you're going to slow control eccentric. Then you'll learn how to do the isometric pause on the bottom. And then you'll do it really, really fast. But he flipped it on its head from what I had been taught by a few coaches. And I guess I'm asking, is that what you did? Like, again, I'm not asking you to comment on how he, like, just do you remember doing things in that order? Or like you just said, hey, we never did anything more than 2 or 3 times the exact same way?
No, I would say that Jay, I mean, if I were to guess, he probably had 300 or 400 different exercise methodics based on energy systems. So there would be heavies, there would be extreme isometrics, there would be eccentrics. Sometimes it would be you're going to lower and stop for 3 counts at 3 different positions. Sometimes it would be we're going to hold for 30 counts. Sometimes it would be we're going to stop on the way up at halfway. Sometimes we would, have partners hold us down in an isometric where we're pushing, as hard as we can into them for 10 seconds, and then do reps, hold for 10 seconds, then do reps. I mean, when I tell you that there's so many different ways and so many different things. When I tell you I didn't do the same thing for 10 years, I mean, it really was that. So it's really, and maybe it was just because, my experience that, he was able to just make changes in real time. I don't know how he would be if he, wrote you a remote program. It'd probably be different. But with me, he was able to make those changes. And so, I wish that, my conversations with Jay and the time we spent together were always based on how do I execute. I probably, wish I was, talked about programming more and why. And we did talk about that stuff, but it was just all in his head and the way he put it together. And it was, I really can't describe, sometimes we would do 100 altitude drops in a day, right? for 3 days in a row. I mean, it was, I would say, another lesson that I learned is it's not necessarily the exercise, but it's always the how, right? And so learning how to do things and really the detail and what has to happen to go into performing at a high level. So, I mean, just take altitude drops, for example. A lot of people, when I watch them do altitude drops, they step off and land, let's say legs or whatever, they step off and land, but it's not the same as the way I did it. So in my mind, when we're doing altitude drops, and again, I always did it with the visualization, right? And I knew that, what are we trying to do? We're trying to get this to turn on and absorb force as fast as we possibly and hard as we possibly can. What kind of a contraction can we force to happen? And I would picture this jolt of electricity or this bolt of lightning going from my brain to my hamstrings, right? And so it wasn't stepping off and landing. It was, how can I, at that moment of impact, generate force into the ground at the exact same time to get that spike, right? And you can almost feel electricity. You can almost feel like the power going there. I can also, in an altitude drop, I can feel, did the force go into my calves, my quads, my hamstrings, my glutes, my back? I mean, if you're not paying attention to all that stuff, then you're not really getting the same out of it. So, I can notice, I didn't land right there because I felt it in my quads. I wanted to be in my hamstring, right? How do I make that just snap on and just turn on as fast as I can, right? Everything is how you do it. I think people watch, one of those videos where Jay had made like a bench press altitude drop machine. There's a platform or they saw me doing altitude drops, bench presses, and everybody thinks that I was throwing that into the air. Well, no, that wasn't the exercise. The exercise was, that platform, I think it was like 80 pounds. And sometimes we would put a 45-pound plate on it. So it was heavy and it hurt. And so it's not just, and they would raise it up and drop it, right? And then sometimes we would do an immediate rebound or whatever. But people see it as we're throwing it in the air. Well, that's not what it is. I'm trying to figure out, how can I meet the plate as fast as I can and generate that force and generate that powerful contraction at the bottom, that moment of transition, right? So to do that, you have to pull down faster than it falls, and then you got to meet it. But if you do it wrong, then it's going to go into your elbows, your joints, your wrists. So you really have to learn, how do I turn it on as hard and as fast as I can, right? Everything we do is at that level of intent. So there's a much different way. We could be doing the same exercise, and even my friends and guys that played would come in, but they didn't do it the way I did it. They may look the same, but I think it's that level of detail and intent that really goes into maxing out what you can get out of it, if that makes any sense.
No, that does. And something I wrote down here is, nowadays I think most coaches are trying to find ways to be sport specific or make sure this translates to the field. Was that ever a conversation that you and Jay had, or was it like, no, let's just get incredibly strong and powerful in here, and you're going to sprint, you're going to do all the other stuff, and that's going to translate onto the field because you're also going to be doing field work and DB work?
Dasher, Strength Coach Network's trusted provider for timing gates for your athletes. Whether you're trying to run A-cells, curve, flies, change in direction with the Pro Agility, the 505, modified 505, whatever you want to do, get valid and reliable setup with your Dasher. I had the black, the blue, and now we have the silver at Goldfinch. We're completely moving over from the blues to just only having the silvers. I only test my athletes on the silvers because it has helped me save so much time, whether I'm going from Ankeny over to Nevada or Ankeny over to Huxley. Whatever I got to do, I save so much time, and I want you to be able to save so much time with your setup up because we know that time is precious as strength coaches. Now, not only are you going to be able to save time, but you're going to be able to save money with this great product, and you have a valid and reliable product that has run through countless different articles, as you continue to see online being published with the accuracy of this information. So if you want to learn more about Dasher, click the link down below to be able to go to their website and learn more about them.
Yeah, this was the interesting byproduct of our training. I think if you talk to Jay and really you talk to me, and again, I'm going to preface this and say I don't research this stuff. I really don't care about the research. All I care is how does something make me feel, and I could feel whether it's right or not. But I think the concept of the brain body connection. Jay always used to talk about this. Whether it's weights or plyometrics or drills, all it is an electrical signal from your brain to your muscles or whatever it is, yep. Right? So that's all it is. So what are we trying to do? We're trying to strengthen that electrical signal from our brain to our body to tell it, maybe to turn on, but also to relax in the right part, right? And so it's how strong and how controlled and how good and reliable can you make that signal? And so you can do that in the weight room if everything you do is designed under that premise. And so in theory, if you have that kind of control and you strengthen the signal between your brain and your muscles, well, then that translates to the field, right? I mean, that's essentially what it is. It's no different. I think one of the other things that really makes Jay unique and how much he talked about and how much the idea of absorbing force and how important that concept is to training in athletics. And you can only, in his words, and maybe I'm not going to say it accurately, but basically, you can't create what you can't absorb, right? And so you have to be able to absorb massive amounts of force if you ever want to be able to create it. And that really stuck to me, especially when I observe and I see other people in the way they train. Everything is based either on the concentric part of the movement, or it's based on, and this is how you and I maybe got together, based on some sort of conditioning or fatigue aspect. And then it's just getting through the workout. Well, what are you actually training, right? We're trying to train our body to move better. How do you train your body to move better? Well, you got to strengthen that relationship between your brain and the rest of your body. And then it's not just about the concentric contraction. It's about being able to get your muscles and train at length. And then it's also the ability for the antagonistic muscles to be able to relax. There's this crazy dance that has to happen for things to come together. And I don't think, from what I see, especially with young athletes, everything's about the completion of the lift. Nothing is about how you do it. And so, that's kind of why I'm pretty adamant, about the quality and the way you train is really more important than the actual exercises that you use.
Yeah, I agree with that too, because I first learned about where it's like, hey, if you're only looking at somebody's squat depth, but you're not really watching how they do it, it's like, oh, did you get low enough? Well, I mean, are you ignoring that their toes are completely turned out, their heels are coming off the ground? Like, hey, the rep was done, but how was the rep done?
Yeah, I mean, another thing that Jay was maniacal about position and technique, and position is everything. And making sure you train in the right position, making sure if you're doing lunges, is your torso in the right position? Is your shoulders backing down? Everything is your face, is it relaxed? Like everything has to be in the right. If your toe is turned out, he was maniacal about that. And I believe in that. I think this kind of goes back to, and maybe I'm jumping around a little bit, but you're kind of jogging my memory. When you asked me about, maybe doing some higher rep things. Now, here's the other thing that I see is that when people fail or you get tired at the end of a set, and Jay will always say, and I believe in this, almost everything is designed for us to fail, but how you fail is vitally important. And so he always used to say, and I believe this, and this is what I always try, you want to be able to fail in position. Well, what happens when athletes get tired most of the time? Well, they start losing control of their bodies, right? And their technique goes, and maybe they're failing around, or you start to see their face. And, again, it's easy to visualize a bench press. You're struggling, then you start to see all this. Or even if you watch somebody run and at the end of their sprint, everything's good. At the end of their sprint, they're all over the place. That's not conditioning to me, right? And so everything is, okay, I may be tired, I may be going to failure, but try and maintain this position, the proper position through failure. Let your partner help you through that, so you're failing in position, right? We want to be, and this goes back to the conditioning aspect of it. Everybody's going to get tired, but when you get tired, can you stay present enough to try to fight through and maintain the right technique in the right position? In my mind, you get in better condition if you train like that in everything you do, right? So I think that's a component of conditioning that, at least my definition. And again, that's why I kind of responded to you that one day in the way that I did. It's kind of hard in a post to have this kind of a conversation, but these are all different factors in my mind that go into conditioning, right?
Yeah, and like you just said, I mean, it takes a mentally hard person to physically be able to push their body through it, because I'm hoping all of our listeners have physically trained themselves to know exactly what you're talking about, to be able to handle, physiologically, we're talking now, yes, lactate clearance, but then also the hydrogen ion buffering, and in that painful, whatever you want to call it, Tony Holler says, that's the suck of that 400, the end of the race. Like, it's going to suck no matter what. What are you going to do? How can you handle it? Like, you just have to know that it's coming and be mentally strong enough to handle it.
But I think it comes with how you train in the gym as well. Like I said, I started working with some high school kids the last couple of years because I felt like I had to step in and help our high school. And it's interesting, inevitably.
You went to?
No, it's where my son goes.
Gotcha.
And inevitably you see this, things get hard and they just start losing control of their body, right? But everybody just tries to do everything possible to get through the set. And to me, that's wrong. No, like, you're not just trying to get through it. Fail in position. That's when you have to be at your best composure, right? What do I have to do? The goal isn't to get through it. The goal is to be in the right position at the end of it. And even if you have to drop to your knees or whatever, what do I have to do to be in the right position? One thing that, and I don't know the technical aspect of this, but we did do conditioning with Jay, but a lot of it would happen in the gym. And really what I noticed, and it sucked, but a lot of it always had to do with some sort of fatigue element for time.
Player Data is Strength Coach Network's trusted provider for GPS technology, and it's simple. The price you cannot beat, and the validity and accuracy of their technology is second to none. The price is outstanding. Go ahead and reach out to them to learn more about the pricing specific to you and however many units you're going to get. And then the validity. Player Data has been tested and run through FIFA's validation process for FIFA to then be utilizing Player Data technology. FIFA, we all know that name. They would not be utilizing a product that cannot live up to the competition and cannot be able to provide real, live, and accurate data. Player Data is able to do this. Not only do they have great software and hardware, but I know that the customer service is fantastic because I have worked with these individuals before. Click the link down below to learn more about Player Data.
But then there was also always an explosive element that you had to do, or some type of force absorption that you had to do in that, right? And so whether it was, I'll just, calf jumps to a lunge, right? Where you do, 10 calf jumps and land in a hard, strong lunge, right? Back and forth for 3 minutes, things like that. Or vertical jumps to a lunge, 6 vertical jumps, but jump in the air, land in a lunge, hard, right? Strike the ground, absorb. So there's always an aspect of you have to complete some sort of high performance, some sort of fast twitch while you're under fatigue, right? Or maybe it was in the way we did this, a speed Russian lunge, right? where you're holding a lunge and then on a go command, you have to do a fast speed Russian lunge without raising off the floor. And you had to do that once, a command, he'd give a command once every 5 seconds for 3 minutes, right? Those were the conditioning aspects of what we did. And so I always felt, and to me, my results always spoke for themselves. I was never the guy that was going to be a great, when we did 110s or I could get through it. I was never that guy, but yet nobody played as long and as hard as me either. Right. And so again, that's why I responded to you in the nature of the way I did. I think there's just other ways to look at things. That was one of the things that Jay did. So we did have conditioning elements. And again, I can't sit here and tell you, well, he was working this energy system or that, all I know is, yeah, it sucked. But again, there was always some semblance of you had to perform something. You had to move something. You had to absorb something over and over and over again while you were fatigued, right? And so being able to hold that technique and be able to execute that and perform that, that's conditioning.
That right there, what you just said, is kind of proof of what Mark Hoover said in response to both of us talking online was, we're essentially saying the same thing. We were more on the same page about things than we weren't. And is also the beauty of social media when people can have a conversation and then it can turn into this and be even more of an evolutionary conversation that helps people, because I agree with what you just said right now.
Well, I agree. I mean, I think that in life, maybe, I don't know, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, I knew everything. And then I had kids and I realized I don't know shit. But listen, I'm not like it. I'm just like anybody else. I've had attachments to my ego, right? Inevitably, that's not the right way to be. I think I certainly have a strong affinity and a strong opinion on the way people should train. And I believe,
let's also qualify it with that. Like,
sure.
You're allowed to, in the same way that myself and other strength coaches that have done things for a while, based off of your lived experience, like that's called that qualitative data versus quantitative data of like hard numbers. Like your lived experience versus strength coach's lived experience and maybe classroom stuff. When a strength coach listens to this right now, they're gonna be like, dude, the things you're talking about, you're qualified to be a strength coach, whether or not you have a certification or not.
Well, certainly, programming, maybe not, but I believe that I'm an expert in the execution of high performance and whatever that is. But just kind of to finish, I used to have a strong attachment of, just like a lot of people, of this is the only way to do it. I don't believe that. I believe in Jay. We do have some disagreements about certain things, but one thing I have learned is even though there's a lot of tremendous people out there doing a lot of good work that have contradictory ideas to Jay, quite honestly, maybe 15 years ago, I wasn't open to that. And I think that's being small-minded, right? I think if you have a growth mindset and you have a mindset of just, hey, we're all here to help each other and strip the ego away from it, I think you can have good conversations.
How did you make it work in the NFL then, training with Jay? You talked about doing it at ASU. You were essentially allowed to do whatever because of your success on the field. Well, now you go and yes, you get drafted in the first round, but you're a rookie. Are you still able to do that type of stuff? What does that look like?
No, my reputation at that point spoke for itself. Okay. And teams let me do what I wanted to do, quite honestly. That wasn't really an issue. Now some strength coaches still would try to tell me what I was doing was wrong. I mean, there's the ego part of it. But for the most part, I was able to just do what I did, quite honestly. So again, that wasn't really an issue.
Now, you've talked about this before, but briefly summarize, what do you think made your pro day training so special about what you did?
You mean the performance?
Yes.
Besides the numbers?
Yes.
I just think that it was kind of a culmination of everything. that day didn't happen because I just, started training. That day happened because of the person that I built inside for 5-6 years. So to
17-year-old boy that wanted a $50 year-long subscription.
Yeah, absolutely. I knew, it's kind of a gift and a curse, I think, in a bit, because I think I don't think I was born with any overly tremendous, athletic ability. That's certainly nothing that jumps off the charts. But what I think that I've been able to do is have this ability to just detach from any emotion whatsoever, or any judgment about what's happening or my circumstance, and just look at things as problem solving, and just, okay, what do I need to do? What is the best and most efficient way to accomplish this? Okay, what's next? And so, the draft process was, I started finally getting some attention after my junior season. But there was still this idea that, hey, I've got to move from linebacker to safety. And so maybe at the beginning of my senior season, it was like, okay, people could start seeing me as because of the projection, a mid-round pick, right? Well, when you move to safety, the number one thing they need to know is, can he actually run, right? We know the film looks good, but again, can he actually run? And so after that process, my senior year finished, and now, like, legitimately as a prospect, it's like, all right, this guy's really good. He's probably the best linebacker in college football, but he's 211 pounds. So he's going to be a safety. And so, all right, what's the next step? Well, I got to go to the Senior Bowl, and I've got to prove that I can move, and I have the chops. My first time they see me as a safety, this is what I have to do. This is what I have to show. So now it's like, all right, I'm focused here. This is what I do. I check that box. I crushed the Senior Bowl. So now the next step is the combine. All right, can he run? And I just knew. And what's interesting about what we did is we just trained. And so I never counted my steps or did any of that stuff in the short shuttle. I made me practice. I mean, I did practice the short shuttle just to figure it out, but we never worked on a specific technique or counted our steps. It was just, I knew that when that day came, I was going to be ready. And it's just like, all right, this is what I have to do. Boom. And then when I think my first 40 that I ran was in 4.45 or something. And then the second one was a 4.37. And then I was like, all right. So then once that happened, now it's like, it's legit. Like, this guy really is, what his film shows, and he can make that shift and play safety in the NFL. So, I didn't really feel like there was any pressure, because in my mind, like, I had built my entire identity around this day. Now, the caveat to that, when you have that ability to detach and have no emotion, now, I can't say I was necessarily good at making relationships with people, and it has its detriments. But as far as, goal-oriented problem solving, it works really well.
That was going to be my question. Like, once you finally ran that 4.37 and you've just been so like, okay, dude, get these things done. Was it even like, okay, I'm excited that I did it, or was it just like, okay, cool, moving on?
Well, no, because of course I was excited. It's everything was focused on, again, draft day. So, once that happened, it wasn't just the 4.3, the short shuttle. I got to admit, the numbers are pretty unbelievable, and so it was at that time, once I finished the Senior Bowl, I was kind of projected as maybe a late first round, second round pick. And then once now I hit that number, I probably didn't have to hit that number. I could have been under 4.5 or even 4.5. But once I hit that and I put all those numbers together, it was like, all right, this guy, was really something. So the day after my pro day, Mike Martz took me out to lunch, and he said, he essentially told me that if they dealt Trent Green to the Chiefs and got the 20th pick, they were going to take me at 20. Now, I didn't know whether to believe him or not, but, I know the night before they made that trade, and certainly when the Steelers were on the clock at 19, my heart was beating pretty fast. So I knew that with my body of work and the film I put together in college, the Senior Bowl, the numbers and the pro day, I knew I had a pretty good shot, to go pretty high, even though I was a projected, I didn't play safety in college.
That's incredible. Again, just as a high person that admires high performance and high achievers, that's just an incredible mindset.
Yeah. I guess Al Bundy felt pretty good about himself back in the day as well. So, again, we're 25 years ago. So
Now,
it's tough to replicate.
About Brenda Freeze and a coach believing in speaking power into an athlete, and you said it can't be a parent. I couldn't agree with you more, but for somebody like you that has that mindset, where can I don't know how to try to say it, but like being able to then help your children get somebody pouring into them, because a lot of our listeners are parents. How can we find good people, good coaches that can do that, and you don't want to overstep your bounds as the parent, and you want to let them go and find that?
I think it's hard. I really do. Now, I should say this. I wish that fathers and mothers, but I'm a father, so I'm going to speak for fathers.
Yep.
Could fill that role. Most can't. Most can't separate the emotion. Most can't separate their dreams versus their kids' dreams. And that's really, really, really a fine line. And I've seen far, far, far more poor relationships than I have seen success stories. Now, certainly there are success stories. There's no doubt about that. But to me, it's, I think that, I look at my story with Jay and somebody that like legitimately tested me. I'll give you an example. So finally, after 6 months, of training on my own, he said, "Hey, you can work out with us." And so it was June. It was the middle of June in Arizona. He said, "We're going to be at the track at Westwood High School. Meet us at 2:00. And so it was 114 out, black tar track, whatever. And so I was a little bit late because I couldn't quite find it. And so I kind of joined in a little late with the group that was training. And so, I was going to say, man, I'm going to show this guy that I'm a hard worker and I can do this. And, so I did kind of finish the workout. And then he said, well, you have to do what they did before you got here. And so it was pretty simple. It was just a series of three 200-meter sprints. And so it was sprint 200, walk 200, sprint 200, walk. And so I finished the first one and he was timing it. And so then I was getting ready to finish the second one and my legs started to obviously give out, what happens when you're exhausted. So right around the finish line, my legs started to give out. It was 115 out. I started throwing up and rolling around the ground. And legitimately, I felt like I was dying, right? We've all been there before. And so finally I get up and I kind of like gather myself and they just left me there. Everybody was gone. And so I'm kind of looking around. I'm like, really? And so I drove back to his gym. His gym was kind of around the corner. And as soon as I shut the door, he's like, "Did you finish?" And I was like, I almost died. And he just ripped me. And he's just like, "You don't have what it takes." And again, so that was kind of our relationship. He kicked me out of his gym. He told me I didn't work hard enough. He would say this in front of other people, and he would really test me. There were times where I would, work out with him at 6 a.m. It would just be me and him in his gym. And he would go in his office and he would say, "Okay, this is what you're going to do, for the next 45 minutes. And then I would do that training and whatever he asked me to do. And then he would say, "I could tell by the way the plates moved, you weren't working hard. Do it again." Right. I mean, that's how I lived with him. And so then he would kick me out and say, "Don't ever come back." And so then I'd show up and I'd be at his doorstep at 6 a.m. and wait for an hour. So, I mean, when I tell you like the psychological and emotional Like he made you, and it didn't stop when I got to the NFL. I mean, he was even just as hard. And so when I tell you, that kind of just that, hey, do you really, really want this? Or do you just say you want this? I think that's really tough for a father to put an athlete through that. Right. And so I believe now as a father that, yeah, your job is to mentor and coach and be there, but you've got to be able to turn that and support, right? And support your kid and give them the tools to be able to deal with things like that. Right. And so that's why I say those things. It's like, I think there's an element of going through hell, quite honestly, to be an elite competitor. And it's a slippery slope if that's your parent. I don't know many who can pull it off.
Yeah, and even hearing that, like thinking as a parent, knowing like your kid, like, your mom, if she would have known all the things you're going through, or your dad, would be like, Adam, why are you still going back? Or like, is this guy really worth it?
Well, imagine, I mean, I guess I have to think about it as a dad now. Imagine, that's your 17-year-old son and it's 115 and this trainer just left him there rolling around, throwing up in the heat, right? Like most parents wouldn't put up with that. And most parents don't. And I'm not saying that, I'm not necessarily condoning it, but I'm just saying none of that bothered me. It was literally, it's like, okay, what do I got to do to train? What do I got to do to, I never let those things bother me. I was as elite mentally of dealing with whatever as could be. And I'll also say, and this is why I'm so big on mindset, that as strong and as mentally tough as I was to be able to be resilient, and show grit, I also went through a phase at the end of my career where I was mentally weak. And my career ended primarily because of it, right? And so the power of the mind and the story you tell yourself and the things that you focus on literally can accomplish unbelievable things, but they can also destroy everything, right? And that's where it all starts.
What was all that? Forgive my ignorance, or if you don't want to talk about
it. What exactly?
The tail end of your career. I'm not familiar with what you're talking about.
Well, the short version is basically, when I signed a free agent contract with the Redskins, at that time, I became the highest paid safety in NFL history. 2 years after that, I was out of the league. Right. And so there was a lot of things that started to brew that I allowed. Now, I won't go into, there's no reason to rehash detail. Right. And I always say this. There was a lot of stuff that I had to deal with, a lot. And a lot of it was out of my control. But what was in my control was how I responded to it. And so I wasn't mentally tough enough to overcome that level of what was happening to me. So my responsibility of that is I started focusing on the wrong things. When you start to do that, now all of a sudden you start employing kind of a victim mentality of life. And so now instead of creating excellence, you're responding to things happening to you. And when you have that kind of a mentality, it's not possible to be the best. It's not possible to create excellence. And so that spirals out of control, and all of a sudden, everything you've built is gone, right? That's kind of the short version of it. But I think everybody comes up in something in life where, hey man, something's going to test you beyond what you think is possible. And maybe I had these built-in natural tools and a system to be able to work it. But because I had a kind of a shift in mindset that I wasn't aware of, I allowed these things to kind of take control and take over. And then I was just immortal like everybody else. Right. And so that's kind of the general theme of what happened.
You talk about mental toughness. What does that word mean to you? Because a lot of our strength coaches that are at least listening to this, they're not the ones doing that mental toughness Navy SEAL training. We can talk about that and how it doesn't translate to the field, because I think we both agree on that. What does mental toughness look like to you, and how do you train it? I know we've kind of talked about it, but let's just hammer it down here and kind of wrap this all up so you can go about the rest of your day.
Yeah, I was fortunate enough to Man, I've had a lot of great mentors. Obviously, Jay was one of them. I had another gentleman. When I was going through this period of time, I was really kind of a miserable. Really, I wasn't a very good person. I will say this because I have to say this. Certainly, one of the factors of that was that at that time in my life, I didn't have God in my life, and so when you don't have that, and then you're kind of your own God. And everything, your identity is wrapped up in this material world and the football world, and then that's gone. You can get into a pretty bad place, right? So first, I'll say that was missing. But then it was like one of the first things that started happening is that for the first time in my life, things bothered me, and I started to feel anxiety, and I had never experienced before where I didn't have control of my thoughts and my mind was racing. And it was just like, it was negative reactive thinking over and over and over in this victim mentality. And so I reached out to a gentleman named Chris Doris that I had met in the, mental toughness world. And I had met him a couple years before and I reached out to him and I said, "Hey man, I need some help, man. I'm struggling, And so we ended up meeting, and I'll never forget this. He asked me he said, "All right, tell me what's going on." And so I started telling him, what's going on, this and that for, a few minutes. And he's like, "Stop." He said, "Man, you got to stop complaining." And I'm like, "What are you talking about? I'm not complaining. Like, I'm not a complainer. That's not me." And he's like, "Well, I just counted like in that 5 minutes, you complained in some sort of fashion, like 47 times. And he pointed out every time I complained or whatever. And it made me realize is that nobody wants to think of themselves as a complainer, right? So we get really clever at disguising that. And so in all these little subtle ways, like all these things enter our mind where we're complaining in some way, shape, or form about something. And so when you start complaining, then all of a sudden you start employing a victim mentality, right? And so you start employing a victim mentality. Well, now you are reacting to the world's circumstances instead of creating your own excellence, right? And so he has a line that I say this all the time, and I firmly believe this, that nothing of excellence has ever been created in a state of complaint, right? And so there's a lot of truth to that. And so I've lived the opposite end of that, so I know it works. And then I've lived this end of it, and I know it doesn't work, right? And so I think when you talk about mental toughness, it's just the ability to catch yourself and be able to put yourself in a state where you can create excellence, and catch yourself when you find yourself going in a different direction. And really, it's kind of that simple, right? Whether it's negative self-talk, negative reactive thinking, whether it's looking at all that can go wrong, those are all like negative states, right? Where you can't have the creative process that you were born to have. And so you've got to be able to recognize it, because most of us, and I've been there before, most of us go through life and we're just constantly bombarding our subconscious with negative complaints or a victim type mentality. And we don't even realize it. And all of a sudden years go by and you're like, wait a minute, why does my life suck? Well, it's because you're not taking control of it, right? So first you got to be aware of it. Then you have to be able to replace it. And so he just started teaching me tools of being able to catch yourself, replace it, so you can get back to the creative state that you were meant to be in. I mean, that's kind of in a nutshell. All those things I did naturally until I couldn't do it anymore. And then I had to learn a toolbox. And so that's, again, we could talk about, that process. That's a whole nother series of podcasts, but I've run the gamut of success and failure, and they're life lessons that really I could never have learned with any type of college degree.
No, and it's a lot harder to praise in the mountains, in the valleys, even though that's exactly what we're called to do. And it is very easy to praise on the top of the mountaintops, but there is a lot of growth that happens in the valley, whether we want to admit it or not.
No doubt.
Adam, I greatly appreciate your time. It's been over an hour with you. Thank you very much for allowing me and our listeners to learn from you.
No, I appreciate it. Anytime. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome.